All right. So let's talk about finding sides, missing sides, sorry, using trigonometry. So if you do not remember the basic trig function, sine, cosine, and tangent, there's another video up for those three. So I would review that before embarking upon this journey. But let's get started. Yeah. So first thing I want to do is I want to determine which function I need to use. So to do that, my first step is going to be I'm going to identify what angle I'm looking at. So currently I'm looking at the 30-degree angle. One, because I was given that angle. Two, because we're not going to look at the right angle. The only reason the right angle is there is to allow us to use right triangle trigonometry. And so it's makes sense to use that angle. We could potentially use the other one, but realistically 30 makes the most sense. Next thing I want to do is label the sides. So I've got three options. That's opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse. Now clearly the hypotenuse is the longest side, and that's opposite our right angle, which right now we don't have any value there. So x and 18 should either be the adjacent or the opposite side, right? So first, let's look at x. Well, in my mind, x is on the opposite side of the triangle from 30. So it makes sense that perhaps x should be our opposite side, right? And then that would make 18 our adjacent side, as it's not the hypotenuse. Also, the adjacent side should be touching that angle, which it is. So if we remember SOHCAHTOA, then it seems like we should be using tangent because we have the opposite and the adjacent, right? So let's start by setting that up. So I always take the tangent of an angle, that angle being the 30-degree angle that we've predetermined, and that is equal to the opposite over the adjacent, which is going to be x over 18. And then we want to solve for x. So to do that, I'm going to multiply both sides by 18. On the right side, that cancels out my 18. And on the left side, we have to perform the operation because we already did it on the right side. So if we didn't do it on the left, that would change the value of the entire expression. And so then it would not be true. So it's important that if we do something to one side, we also do it to the other. So now I've solved for x. X is equal to 18 times the tangent of 30. Now, unless your brain is a calculator, this probably doesn't mean a whole lot to you, and so we should probably go about plugging that into a calculator. So before we go plug that in, I want to take a second to anticipate what our answer should be. So ideally, it should be somewhere close to 18, and by close I mean it wouldn't make sense if it was 40 or 50 or 60, and it wouldn't make sense if it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, something like that, right? The other thing is it should be a little bit shorter than 18, just based on looking at the picture there. So before I go plug it in, I do these sanity checks in my mind so that when I get an answer, I can say, oh, that does make sense, or oh, I must have done something wrong or plugged something in wrong or missed a step on the problem. That allows me to make sure that I'm not making big mistakes that aren't fixable, right? So you guys don't have graphing calculators, so we're going to use Desmos. So let's hop on over there. So I want to plug in 18 times, 18 times the tangent. So to get tangent, I'm going to click on this functions button, and you'll see 4 categories at the top. We want to be in trig, and I'm going to select tangent, and then I type in the degrees, which is 30, and I get out negative 115. Now we're talking about a side length, so negative 115 doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. Now what I neglected to do before this was to change my Desmos into degree mode. So if I click on the wrench on the right hand side, you'll see a variety of options, and at the bottom, you'll see radians or degrees. We haven't used radians, but we have used degrees, so I'm going to switch it to degrees, and I get out 10.39. That makes a lot more sense to me. So 10.39 is going to be our side length. And that makes sense, right? It's shorter than 18, but it's not so much shorter that it doesn't fit in with the triangle, right? So x was in the numerator. We solved for x, and we ended up with something like 18 times tangent of 30. That is option 1 for something that we might frequently get. We're now going to take it's time to look at option number 2. Okay. So first step is always going to be to identify our angle, which is going to be 24, and then identify our side lengths. So I think that x is our hypotenuse, that's our longest side, and I think that 18 is our adjacent side, and that we don't have an opposite side. So we've got the adjacent and the hypotenuse. If I go to SOHCAHTOA, adjacent and hypotenuse, it looks like I should be using cosine, so I'm going to start setting that up. So the cosine of our angle, which is 24 degrees, is equal to the adjacent, which is 18, oopsies, over the hypotenuse, which is going to be x. Right? Now, this time x is in the denominator, so we can't do the exact same step, and what you're going to notice happens is that x and the cosine of 24 are going to switch places. I'm going to take a couple steps to get there just so you guys can see the math behind it. So two things I want to happen. I want x to be in the numerator, and I want x to be by itself. So I multiplied both sides by x, and I've accomplished one of my goals, and that is to get x in the numerator. All right, so I've done that. Now I've got, oopsies, x times the cosine of 24 is equal to 18. And I want to get x by itself, so I want to divide both sides by the cosine of 24. Now I'm allowed to do this because the cosine of 24 is just some number. We haven't calculated it yet, but really the cosine of 24 is just some number like 10 or 11, right? We can add it, subtract it, multiply it, divide it, and so that's exactly what we're going to do. And on the left side, it cancels out, and so what we're left with is x is equal to 18 divided by the cosine of 24. Right? So two options. You either had 18, or your number that you're given in the problem times some trig function, or your number divided by some trig function, and that'll depend on if x is in the numerator or if x is in the denominator. If x is in the denominator, then you're going to get some division like this, and if it's in the numerator, then you're going to have multiplication. Right? So really two options there. You should be getting one of those two before you plug into a calculator. At this point, I've got x simplified for as much as I can without a calculator, so I'm going to go back to Desmos, where I'm going to take 18 and divide that by the cosine of 24. So 18 divided by the cosine of 24 gives me 19.70. Once again, that makes sense to me. It's longer than my side length, so given that it's the hypotenuse, it makes sense that it should be longer. While it's not very much longer, we'll notice that that kind of happens when we have a shallow angle like 24 degrees there, and so in my mind that kind of makes sense. Sanity check, it passes. If you would like more practice or you have additional questions, please reach out to me via email. Otherwise, I hope you guys are all doing well. Yeah, that is that.